Hello everyone, thanks for inviting me along here today. I do quite a lot of these talks, and I always find it fascinating if there's other speakers to listen to what they have to say, and always find it refreshing and inspiring, and how even though people have different styles and work in different genres, the similarities. Paige was great this morning, talking about not overshooting and how you, even when you're frightened to talk to people, you have to take charge of a situation. That is essential. Daria's pictures are, illustrate perfectly, of having a vision, having a passion about your photography. And I loved Nadine's soap analogy this morning. I'll never look at soap again without thinking about that. But she also made a very good point right at the end there when she said, value your skills. There are so many people out there giving away photography. It has value, And if they value it, don't you not value it? So, let me tell you a wee bit about myself as a way of introduction. I'm 40 years this year as a professional photographer. And that time has seen huge changes in the industry and in photography itself. I grew up in Cumbernauld, in Newtown, and this is me here at the age of 18, taking a summer job in gratis school in Glasgow. I had no interest in photography at all at this point, and I was going to Glasgow University to do a degree in physics, and I was looking for a job in the summer to give myself some money. And this gratis school was the camera shop away back then, Queen Street in Glasgow. And I went in and I was offered a job on the spot. And over the space of the summer, I became absolutely fascinated with cameras, really the kind of gadgetry of it initially. I have to be honest with that. Now, not interested in the gadgetry at all, but at the end of the summer, I bought myself a camera, and then one day a photographer from the Daily Record came in to pick up cameras. We supplied the Daily Record with their cameras. Bobby Hotchkiss, who became a friend of mine, and he described what he was just back from Argentina or somewhere like that. And I thought, my God, somebody gives you camera equipment. I've just spent a fortune here buying a camera. And somebody's giving you camera equipment and they're sending you all over the world to, take pictures, and they pay you after that. This is the life that I really want to lead, and not, still was interested in physics, but I said, now how do you become, one of these professional press photographers? And Bobby said, well, when he started, it was, he used to go for the cigarettes for the guys who worked in the darkroom, and then you eventually get working in the darkroom developing films, printing, and then eventually somebody would let you take a picture, so and so. He said, but at that point there was a degree course run in Sheffield by the NCTJ in photojournalism, where you learned to become a photographer. You also learned how to write, you learned how to take shorthand, you learned about law and things like that. I applied in that course, put my degree at Glasgow on hold, applied in that course and did very well in it. I graduated with distinction and honours. And after that, I worked down in London for a year. But London's not for everyone, and it certainly wasn't for me. I'm a bit of a homebody, and I came back up to Scotland and started working in local newspapers up here. And I worked for about a year and a half in the local newspapers. And then the local newspapers were great places to learn your trade and practice it. Because, once you'd got a few pictures that would illustrate, a story, you could then experiment, and it encouraged you to experiment. If you on a weekend, you could maybe have 20 jobs to do for a local paper. And it would be things like the WRI jumbo sale. Now, you can get everyone sitting behind a table holding things and be really boring. But you can also then find the wee kid sitting in the corner with an old brass fireman's helmet sitting on, and know that that can make a, you know, a picture. So in situations like these, you know, you learn to develop your skill, and you could practice things. And if you got something wrong, then nobody really knew about it but you. And you could go and practice it again. You know, so the annual memorial, what do you call it, the Armistice Day, you know, you'd cover it one way with all the old soldiers, and then you'd look for other things that were, you know, more pictures. This was in Glasgow, a visit of Mother Teresa, and just in the middle of a prayer, a wee kid started laughing, and she just opened her eyes briefly and started smiling very enigmatically. Anyway, I started putting all these pictures into competitions, and I was lucky enough to win the Young Photographer of the Year and the local newspaper Photographer of the Year, and I was invited there and then to join the staff of the Herald and Evening Times in Glasgow. Now, coming from a local paper, this was quite a jump. I had my own camera equipment there, and as I said, you know, you worked every hour of the day. I joined the Herald and Times and was working a 4-day week. Newspapers back then worked 4-day weeks. It's hard to believe, you know, this. They gave us, you know, all the thousands and thousands of pounds worth of camera equipment and exotic lenses, and with a wee nice bonus of trebling my salary overnight, which was, you know, was fantastic. This I started in 1986 at the Herald and Times, and this was one of the early jobs in January 1987. This was the siege at Barlinnie. So I just flick past to it. Am I going the wrong way? Yeah. Sorry, the Barlinnie siege. So we were initially underneath the walls of Barlinnie, and then they started, the prisoners had gone to the roof and started throwing slates down, and one of the photographers got injured, so the police moved us away back to a hill. So we're all there with 600 and 800 millimetre lenses, and it was freezing cold January, and the prisoners were all up on the roof. And this is the thing about press photography, it can be periods of, you've got to keep your concentration, because you can be standing out there for like 12 hours and nothing happens, and then something happens and you've got to react to it very, very quickly, and that is the definitive picture. This, for example, was one of the prisoners climbed up onto the top of the chimneys, and just after he had done this and he's shouting with a megaphone, and we're a good, you know, quarter of a mile away, he suddenly put his hands out like this, just for a brief second, and then put his hands down. Well, just about every photographer missed it, because it came after a long period of nothing, and everybody's shouting, do it again, you know. And he eventually did, and that became a very defining picture from this event. I've been back at Barlinnie many times during my career in newspapers, including spending 24 hours in the jail just to see what, you know, happened in one of the wings and in the special unit. While I was there, I took pictures of 6 o'clock in the morning, the prisoners slopping out. This is before they had toilets in their cells. And they just had a potty to use, which they used to have to. And my pictures were shown at the European Court of Human Justice when the UK were taken to the court because they felt that this was an inhumane practice in the 20th century. And each of the prisoners who were involved in this all got a cash payment made out by the government. move on to the next one. Yeah, so this was taken in the special unit, which was an area within Barlinnie prison which just held the toughest and the most heinous crime prisoners. This is Thomas T.C. Campbell, who was jailed for the ice cream wars in the early 80s. And T.C. Campbell, always protested his innocence right up to his death. And in fact, he was released out of prison. But in the special unit was very, very strange because all the prisoners were allowed to wear their own clothes. They were allowed to. They were all, allowed to wear their own clothes. They were allowed to socialise with the other prisoners. It was quite different from the other prisoners who were banged up, for 23 hours of the day. These, while he was in there, he says, "Do you want to come along to my room?" Not his cell. Come along to me and I'll show you my room. And I was doing pictures for his autobiography. And in his room, he had 2 televisions and a video camera because he was making a wee video, a documentary about himself, and he had stuff to edit, and it was a very, very strange experience. As I said, working in newspapers, you covered everything. Royal visits were a big thing. Princess Diana was a superstar. Papers used to expect an uptake of 20 to 40% if they put Diana on the front of their covers, magazines as well. They would expect a circulation rise of 20 to 30%. She certainly was a very attractive woman to photograph and drew huge crowds. These are some other examples of people from that time that I photographed. And this was, I don't know if we get any football fans in here from the east end of Glasgow, but this was the 100th anniversary of Celtic, and there was a play on at the Pavilion celebrating the 100 years, Wildcat Theatre Company, and they had all their actors dressed up as footballers, and we approached Celtic back then and said, if we got the theatre company to come in and dress your players up, would they do it? I can't imagine footballers doing this now, but back then they come in, they all get their makeup on. We didn't want everyone to be wearing a moustache, but once one of them had a moustache, they decided they all wanted a moustache, as you can see. But it's quite an amazing picture of his day. It's part of a portfolio that won me the Newspaper Photographer of the Year in 1990. Eddie the Eagle there, and this is a good example of a photo shoot that you have to do very, very quickly and get it back into the paper. This was taken for the Evening Times, the Piper one, and it happened at 10:30, and I had to have that picture taken, the film developed, and a print made and scanned by 11:30. So you go along, you set up a situation, and then ask the guy to start playing, and the wee boy started crying. So you set up a situation, and then you let the moment happen. This was the very start of the series of Rab C. Nesbitt, and I was speaking to Gregor Fisher, and we'd seen the early versions of the programme, and I said to him, look, it would be great to get you as yourself, because I knew Gregor from other acting things. I said, it would be great to have you talking to yourself as Rab C. Nesbitt. He said, how would we do that? This is all pre-digital. This is done in the studio on a 6x7 RZ67 camera. He came in straight from rehearsals, dressed as Rabsy Nesbitt, out the taxi, straight into the studio. I had 6 camera backs with film, drew him where he was on the screen, done him talking as Rabsy Nesbitt. Then he disappeared out of the studio, got himself showered and shaved in the bathroom, and came back as he is, and then just advanced the shutter without advancing the film, put the backs back on, and exposed again. It's the kind of thing you can do really in Photoshop so easy now digitally, but back in the days that's all done. That's one negative. Not every job is pleasant. You know, when you're a photographer in a newspaper. This was the Lockerbie disaster. I was there in the early hours of the morning. This was taken at 6 o'clock in the morning, just as still dark, or 7 o'clock rather. It was just becoming light, and we'd just discovered where the cockpit was, which was up in the hills opposite Tundergath Church. Even now, when I look at my pictures from Lockerbie, you know, and there's ones that we don't show, like, you know, of the bodies and the people in Sherwood Crescent, that, you know, there was a woman who heard somebody mention Caravaggio earlier on, I think it was Daria, was draped naked around a chimney breast in this most kind of Pieta-like pose. And, you know, she was one of the passengers on the plane, horrific, but yeah, they had a beauty about it, very, very strange. When I covered Lockerbie, I thought, I'll never cover a bigger story, you know, a story like that again in my life. And yet, you know, several years later, I found myself outside Dunblane Primary School an hour after the shootings happened. And at that point, people didn't know what was what happened. There was parents walking up the street. They were just been told, phoned by the school, told to come up. You know, this is sort of like before the internet, and certainly before social media. And some people were running up, some people were just walking up, laughing. And parents were congregating at the front of the school, and they were all penned in there. And this was at a point, the wider version of this picture, this is the mother of Victoria Clydesdale, who died in the shooting. This is there's a huge big group here, and the police officer at this end over here turned and he said, "It's Mrs. Mayer's class, Primary 1. And, you know, a Mexican wave. That's how that information went back. And when it came back, and it came to Victoria Clydesdale, mum, she stood out with a pink jumper, but she let out a scream. She knew instantly that, you know, her child was not alive. I'm sure she did. And it was the kind of grief that we're not accustomed to in our country of seeing. You see it a lot in the Middle East and things like that. People are very vocal and very, you know, public about their grief. You know, not so much in our country. Also in 1990, I worked on a book called, along with 20 photographers invited from all over the world. As I said, I was the Photographer of the Year, UK Photographer of the Year at the time, and was invited to illustrate a day in life of the Glasgow to mark its being part of the European City of Culture, and this was at Rotten Row Hospital, where the first caesarean section operations were done in the UK. And I was in the operating theatre 2 minutes, and I'm standing with a mohair sweater with all this theatre scrubs on top of it, and it's about 1,000,000 degrees in this operating theatre. It was not a good decision. And I watched this baby being born by caesarean section, which is a very strange thing I'm not squeamish, but to see a knife getting drawn across skin is a very strange thing. And I spent, 24 hours in the hospital illustrating various things. That picture there, when I came in to photograph this woman giving birth, and she's with her mum, she was in gas and air. And I came in, I didn't want to get the gynecological shot, I wanted to get the reaction shot, the emotion. And I stood at the side and she kept looking at me with this mask on with the gas and air. And in between gulps of gas and air, she says, "I know you." And I thought, oh my goodness. She says, "You went to school with me." What are the chances? And right enough, this girl was in my class at school. And what do you say? Oh, I recognise your face now. Very strange. When I first started, as I said, technology has changed. You saw black and white pictures there. We shot black and white. Then the presses came in, and we started shooting colour, negative, and transparency. But to send pictures, from like Lockerbie, or to get them back to the office quickly, we used to have a mobile darkroom. This was the earliest one here, the Muirhead. And you used to make a print, and you put the print just like that on the drum. This is just a more modern version of that. And it would scan, it took 20 minutes to scan that whole thing, and it would send it as an analogue signal to the office, where another machine in a darkroom would use a wee light on photographic paper to using that analogue signal to create a new picture. But, most cases I was, out at events, just shooting film like that. And then we got the very first digital cameras. This one in particular cost £16,000 and was, I think if I remember, it was 1.2 megapixels. And when you looked through the viewfinder, it was like looking through a pipe. Because they had hatched off most of the, you talk about full frame cameras now, that was a tiny wee area. And you managed to get pictures, and you could get pictures back then with a digital phone, maybe back in about 5 or 6 minutes. It was a huge advance. But this was the camera that really started it for newspapers. But this time I had been promoted from being a photographer. I was asked to become the picture editor of the Evening Times, and I changed all our staff. Nikon had me down in London to see this secret camera along with other picture editors. And this was the D1, this was the first really usable digital DSLR. And it looked like a normal camera, and it felt like a normal camera, and the results were fantastic. And it cost like £5,000 each. So it was so much cheaper. And at that point, I was spending in my budget £18,000 a month on film and developing and printing. So we switched over to these very, the accountants thanked us for making great savings. And it's amazing, there's the first cameras we started with, up to modern DSLRs are now shooting on mirrorless. When I decided in 2000, after I became the picture editor of the Evening Times, I then became the group head of multimedia and pictures for the whole Herald and Times, Sunday Herald group. But after doing that until 2009, I decided that I really had got away from, I'd been 10 years working on the desk, and I didn't have control anymore of my creativity. I was controlling other people's creativity, but I really hankered to be taking pictures again. So I left to set up Young Media and to create magazine quality editorial images for companies. I always felt they were badly served by their photography. So, one of my major customers straight away was the Glasgow Housing Association, and we were spending millions in the city, modernising the housing stock there. This is the Red Road flats coming down. The houses in the foreground are the modern houses, and amazing to see that, and the pictures made by the different perspective here, the layers. So these days I specialise in environmental portraiture, shooting for companies with their annual reports, and advertising. The pandemic, has had a terrible effect in business. Any of you remember the singing kettle? There'll be some people that are for a certain age. For years and years, I did all the pictures for the singing kettle, for all their studio stuff, white background, as people were mentioning. And then when the singing kettle finished up, they then became the fun box. This is the fun box guys here with me in the studio. So a very similar thing, but no kettle this time. We had as the name suggests, a fun box. These are actually taken in Stuart's studio. That's how I began to know Stuart. It was always a fun place to work. One of my other big clients at 2010 onwards was when Glasgow was awarded the Commonwealth Games. We spent like 4 years shooting for that, doing advertising and promotional photography. This was a thing early doors called Sport Your Trainers, which introduced the logo and personalities. So with Michelle Mohan doing all boo at the same time, and Carol Smiley, and I shot a lot of stuff with that. A lot of stuff. It was good fun. This was them announcing they were looking for 15,000 volunteers. I got to go into Hampden one night, get them to put all the lights on, specially for me, and then turn them off because it was too bright, and got the light down to just the right balance we wanted. And as it was going to be announced on November 5th, we did a kind of fireworks thing. All these pictures, I'm just going to go into the theme about lighting things. I use a lot of flash, as you can see, as opposed to the available light stuff. News tends to be available light and unadulterated, where commercial editorial stuff tends to require you to get the best out at lighting-wise. But I believe in lighting with, this is another campaign, sorry, for the 2014, where we took the 1 year to go balloon and took it to famous, iconic places in Scotland. This is the Skyfall set for the James Bond film, Stirling Castle, Edinburgh. We're trying to do this unobtrusively because they hadn't launched they didn't want everyone copying it and put it on social media. But as you can see, people have ripped off my photographs. I'm about to speak to these people about cease and desist. Working for 2014 gave me access. This is actually through 2014. I was actually working for UNICEF, and it's not, it's just a group shot, but it's not a bad lineup for a group, isn't it? Usain Bolt and the Royals when they were talking to each other, and this was good fun. They were really good with the kids. We get some great pictures. But it's a big responsibility, doing these rota pictures, that you're taking them exclusively, but they're getting distributed out to the rest of the world to use. So you've got to get them right. I am a big advocate about lifelong learning. This is a friend of mine, Joe McNally. You might have heard of that name. If you don't, have a look and Google him up. He's a fantastic American photographer. Was the last staff photographer for Life magazine. He shoots for National Geographic all the time. He's a great, he teaches now, and he's a great proponent of lifelong learning, as I am. And Joe talks about, creating big light with small flashes. He also says, a saying which really stuck with me. He says, photography is the language of light, so we owe it to learn to speak eloquently, and that is right. Whether it's available light or whether you're creating light, we need to do that eloquently. We're living in a world where 4 million pictures are uploaded to Instagram every hour. 350 million pictures, more than 250 billion in total each year into Facebook. There is a mediocrity, a fog of pictures out there. So we really want to, be able to stand out with our images, whether they're, a vision like Daria's or, beautiful wedding photographs. You know, photography is the language of the light, so we've got to, you know, show that we can speak eloquently. We don't have the luxury of time with big budgets often, you know, to light things with studio flashes. So my kit usually contains 3 speed lights in it, and from those speed lights, I brought Joe across to Edinburgh, and we arranged a photographers meet up that they all paid to come to see, and Joe went through you know, a scenario and showed people how you would shoot it. So this is an example of big light from small flashes. This is Johnny Beattie in the cast of River City that I was doing a thing for NHS, and this is in their green room, which is actually a white room. It's a misnomer, but it's a horrible room, you know, and I wanted, you know, to have a nice, you know, different colour background rather than this white wall. So as you can see, just 3 lights, a gridded softbox, a gridded hair light, and a gel on the backlight speed light. And, you know, from a white room, you know, you get, you know, something with a bit of modelling and a far nicer light and nicer feeling. And, you know, you can take this to the extremes. This, again, is 2 of the stars of, and this was for comic relief. This was another time I was back at River City. And if you remember the inverse square law, does anybody remember the inverse square law? I know what the practical application is, but it says light from a given source varies inversely with the square of the distance. It really means if you put a light really close to someone, it falls off really quickly afterwards. So although that's that same room there, but it's a white room, white background, just with a red gel and a softbox in really close to them in the foreground, and you can make that white go red. You know. Again, you know, this is a thing I did during the lockdown on Instagram. I find Instagram for me is a good social media source of getting work, because it's dealing with the kind of companies that I deal with, and it shows what the reality is. You know, what you see and what I see. You know, I had to get this portrait of this this woman here who was working in a very busy pharmacy, and that was what my reality was. But, you know, light it properly, and then just extend the background in Photoshop, and you've got a far different image. You know, give it a bit of space, and the graphic artists, they all love you. Same here, a really ugly factory. Just gel up the background, and you get, you know, a decent image. Same thing going with the, you know, portraits. You know, amazing what primary colours, you know, will do to something. You know, this engineering company needed, you know, stuff, you know, these great pictures for their websites. They wanted something about late night working, and it's just a case of gelling up a speed light and putting a CTO gel on it to warm it up to make it look like sunset, sticking it out there and zooming the head in, you know, through the blinds, and then another flash gun just bounced off a white bit of paper on the screen. This is some stuff I was doing for a magazine of one of the guitarists out of Wet Wet Wet. He was doing a solo tour. You know, never be afraid to experiment. You know, this is just a wee bit of movement, but, you know, to make the lights just that bit more, give it a bit of movement in it. The flash is going to, you know, he's in the dark, so the flash is going to fix him. Again, you know, this company, gelling that up really, really changes the whole atmosphere of the picture. Stuff for GlaxoSmithKline. This is the largest salt manufacturer, which is in Ayr. and down at the quayside, and they've got these huge big hangars full of salt, and this was the managing director. This is for their annual report. This is for the police force. They were talking about cybercrime. They asked me to come up with an image, and all I've done there is there's a wee flash just in close in a wee small softbox, and I borrowed a projector and used the matrix code, or a similar thing to the matrix code, just to kind of illustrate the subject. COP26, I was asked to form a team of photographers. Very, very late in the day, the United Arab Emirates told me, they came and said, look, don't worry about budget, but we need a team of 4 photographers and a videographer, and we'll pay whatever you want. I was trying to avoid COP because I knew what a nightmare this was going to be. Nobody understands how big it is. I mean, that is the whole of COP there. This is 7 o'clock in the morning, trying to get in. If you left it another hour, this was it to get through security. A nightmare. And then you had to walk with all your equipment all the way through all those tunnels to get, into the main halls. This was the UAE stand. They spent £1.5 million on their stand. When we left the following week, I saw most of the stand was in skips, all broken up, and this was them talking about the environment and saving money. Unbelievable. This is part of my team. It was just a colossal event to cover, and I'm glad I did cover it. But it took quite a toll on us physically, the 2 weeks that we covered it, because there was an awful lot of walking, and the pictures were really boring. But they just wanted us to be there and cover their people, no matter what that meant. And their people included, I'll just get past the interesting people just now. Their interesting people included one of their princesses. This is the kind of pictures they wanted for their social media. This is what we had to provide, and as photographers were mad. This lady on the right-hand side is a princess, and she could only be photographed. You couldn't show very much of her face. We were given strict instructions. That was as much as and every one of these pictures had to be personally vetted before it could go on social media. If we showed her face, I think we could have had a hand chopped off or something like that if we had been in their country. And at the end of the 2 weeks, that's the way I felt. I was absolutely exhausted by it. You have to be kind of fit, to be a photographer working in newspapers. I'm just going to very quickly go through this to wrap up, and then I'll over lunchtime I'll hang about here if people want to come up and ask individual questions. Don't expect you to answer them there. So one of the things when I left, I was asked by the Scottish Government to be involved in creating a photo library for NHS Scotland. And this was great because it allowed me to go all over the country, creating editorial images, and what a privilege it was to be in things like, open heart surgery and the Golden Jubilee, people getting x-rays, all very tricky, lighting situations. There's 2 or 3 flashes in that to light it and balancing it with the available light. These wireless flashes have been a godsend. Picking your different viewpoints, flying with the team in the islands, getting these wee moments, children getting opticians. Down to, just the day-to-day runnings of the NHS in Scotland. And they wanted it very much, as well as sort of magazine pictures, they wanted sort of ordinary, moments captured. But And I think one of the words I would use here, one of the photographers, you've got to be adaptable now, and we've all moved to digital. But now I was one of the very first photographers to be accredited with the CAA to have a drone license. And I just see a drone as another camera. It puts the camera where I can't get to. So this is me a wee back 5 years ago, when drones were just starting and spending a fortune. But for something like that, the client wants, you give them a camera place that you couldn't do before. This is for the house builders in Dumbarton. This was the before, and they were trying to set the scene. All the houses now around the water. This is them demolishing the old whisky distillery. And you can see the views of Dumbarton. Makes it look very, very grand, but it's really not. So, last picture, leave you walking off into the sunset, which that's what I'm going to do this now. But as I say, I'll be hanging around, and anybody wants to ask anything about newspapers. Local papers used to be a great place, as I said, to learn your trade, practice. Very few local papers have staff photographers anymore, and that's a real pity. But it gives you guys at least an opportunity at the start to go along, speak to an editor of the local paper, and offer your services initially just free for 1 or 2 jobs to show that you are able to do things. It gives you access to events that you wouldn't maybe get as just a member of the public. Get your pictures done, impress them, and then ask about a freelance budget. Most of them have a freelance budget to buy pictures, and it might only be 100 quid for a shift or something like that, but it'll give you a start. I was only on local papers, as I say, for a year and a half, and I went straight into nationals. You can do that here as well. National newspapers don't have. When I left the Herald and Times, I had 17 staff photographers. There are 2 now. They've all cut back, but there are still budgets there for freelances. So, it's a great way of developing your skills and getting your pictures published out there. Okay. Well, thank you for listening to me. As I say, I'll be about. Any questions you have,